The sky above Asheville carried that soft gold haze that comes before autumn settles in. I remember the feel of the road under my hands as I drove toward my son's house, the same son I had not seen in 2 years. My name is Mason Lewis. I am 72, a retired carpenter who spent half a lifetime building homes for others and leaving my own heart somewhere between sawdust and silence. I told myself this visit was about family, but truthfully, I wanted to see if time had softened the distance between us. Jacob's house stood at the top of a hill, white and square with glass walls that reflected the sky instead of welcoming it. The air inside smelled faintly of lemon and new paint. Layla greeted me with a bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was arranging slices of avocado on a plate, holding her phone over it to take a picture. She said she was posting something about mindful mornings. I nodded and set my old hat on the counter, realizing there wasn't a single photo of Jacob or me anywhere in sight. Jacob came down the stairs wearing a crisp shirt and the confidence of someone who wanted to prove he'd made it. He hugged me quickly and asked if I'd thought about investing my retirement savings. He mentioned a plan, something safe, a way to grow old without worry. His words felt rehearsed, polished. I tried to listen, but my mind drifted to the faint hum of the refrigerator, to the emptiness that echoed in this spotless place. He poured me coffee into a cup so thin it looked like it might shatter if I breathed wrong. We sat in the dining room. Morning light came through the wide window, and I watched the glass reflections split our faces. Mine looked worn, his sharp. For a moment, I saw my own youth in him. Then it vanished in the gleam of his watch. He kept talking about numbers returned security. I nodded but said little. The warmth between us was a table gone cold. After dinner that evening, Jacob suggested we go to a pub by the lake. He said I'd like the music there. Old jazz, the kind that used to fill our house when Mary was alive. I agreed mostly because I wanted to believe the invitation meant something. The pub glowed under low amber lights. I could smell cedar polish, beer foam, and rain coming through the open door. Jacob ordered for both of us, then excused himself to take a phone call. I watched him step outside his silhouette framed by the doorway, shoulders tense. The bartender, a young man with tired eyes, brought me water instead of the drink I didn't order. He hesitated, then leaned closer and whispered, "Sir, your son isn't on a call. He's meeting a man in a gray suit behind the building." I looked at the kid confused. He said quietly that his mother once knew my late wife Mary, that she had helped her find work years ago. He added, "You should be careful. That man looks like trouble." I turned my gaze toward the window. Through the condensation, I could just make out Jacob shaking hands with someone whose face I couldn't see. Papers changed hands. Jacob laughed, but it wasn't his laugh. It was the kind people use when they owe something. I felt the sound tighten in my chest. The bartender placed a napkin near my glass. On it, he had written one word, Thorn. The music in the bar faded into a hum. I stood up slowly, my knees aching more from what I felt than from age. Outside, the air smelled of wet leaves. I watched Jacob walk away with the stranger until the night swallowed them both. In the reflection on the pub window, my face looked older than it had that morning, older than my years. Something inside me shifted then. It wasn't anger yet, just a quiet understanding. That trust once cracked never fits the same again. I whispered to myself, "Mary, you were right. Time doesn't heal everything. Sometimes it only reveals what's been broken all along." I got back in my truck, started the engine, and sat there until the jazz from inside drifted into silence. I knew as surely as I knew the sound of a hammer hitting oak that something was deeply wrong, not just with the moment, but with the man my son had become. The morning after the pub, the house felt colder. Light filtered through the tall windows, soft but distant. Layla's voice floated from the kitchen, too bright to be real, as she filmed a video about caring for aging parents. I sat quietly, letting my hands tremble just enough to sell the act. The less they suspected me, the safer I was. Jacob walked in with that polished smile that had stopped feeling like his own. He handed me a folder, saying it was an investment plan to secure my retirement. His tone was syrupy, rehearsed. I nodded, pretending confusion, and asked him to leave it on the table. When he walked away, I studied the papers. Halfway through, I froze. The words quitclaim. Deed stared back at me, my house. Sale price, $1. My name printed next to a blank signature line. My chest tightened. I had built that house for Mary beam by beam. Every nail carried a piece of us. Now it was being turned into currency for someone else's ambition. That night, while they slept, I called Marjorie Lane. Mary's old friend and our former lawyer. Her voice came steady, the kind of voice that made people stop shaking. I told her everything. She said Mason take photos of every page and don't sign a thing. Her certainty steadied me. The next morning, the war began. Not with shouting, but in the quiet rearranging of my world. My pills were moved. My keys disappeared. Jacob repeated questions to test my memory. Layla posted a photo of me staring out the window with a caption about the fading light of age. Every small kindness now felt staged. I played along. I asked what day it was. Misplaced, things on purpose laughed at my own mistakes. When they left for errands, I searched Jacob's office. Beneath a pile of bills, I found letters from Thorn Capital marked final notice. My son was drowning in debt. Every polished smile, every smooth word, it was all desperation. That night, I overheard him talking on the phone. His voice was low tense. He said the old man would sign soon. He said it would solve everything. My stomach turned. The old man was me. Lying in bed later, I remembered Mary's voice, soft but sure. If something ever feels wrong, look under our bed. There's a metal box. I'd forgotten that moment for years, brushing it off as sentiment. Now it returned like a signal in the dark. The next morning, I told Jacob I wanted to visit our old home to collect a few keepsakes for memory's sake. He agreed too easily, relief flickering across his face. I smiled faintly, hiding the storm behind my calm. When I stepped outside, the air felt cleaner. The clouds rolled low over the mountains like a curtain waiting to lift. I knew that whatever truth waited under that bed was not just about the house. It was about the kind of man I still had time to be. The road to my old home wound through the Blue Ridge Mountains, the kind of road that made you feel like the world still remembered silence. Morning fog hung low between the trees, and sunlight spilled in pale ribbons across the hood of Jacob's car. He was driving one hand on the wheel, the other tapping his phone. He thought this was a sentimental trip, just an old man chasing memories. That was exactly what I wanted him to think. The closer we got, the quieter I became. Each turn of the road pulled me backward through time. I remembered Mary in the passenger seat years ago, her hair blowing out the window, her laughter mixing with the wind. She used to say that the mountains kept secrets better than people did. I was beginning to understand what she meant. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, Jacob barely looked at the house. He checked his watch and said he would wait in the car. I nodded, pretending to fumble with my cane, then pushed open the door. The first breath I took inside hit me like a memory I was not ready for. The scent of sawdust and lemon polish was still there, faint but loyal, like the echo of a promise. Dust floated in the air, glowing gold in the sunlight that streamed through the window. Every creak in the floorboards greeted me like an old friend. I walked slowly through the house. My fingers brushed the edge of the workbench where I had built Mary's rocking chair. The chair was still there, sitting by the window where she used to read in the late afternoon. The fabric was worn, but it was hers, and the sight of it made my throat tighten. I could almost hear her humming to herself that soft tune she always hummed when she was thinking. In our bedroom, the air felt stiller, heavier. The quilt she made from scraps of Jacob's old flannel shirts lay folded neatly at the end of the bed. The sun hit the floor in a warm square, and I stood there a long time, just staring at it. Finally, I knelt down my knees, protesting. Dust clung to my palms as I reached under the bed. At first, my hand met only cold wood and emptiness. Then my fingertips brushed metal. The box was small and tin, the paint chipped, but still showing the faint outline of red roses. My heart started to pound. I pulled it out and sat cross-legged on the floor, like a man holding something sacred. When I opened the latch, a puff of old air escaped, carrying the scent of paper and cinnamon. On top lay Mary's recipe cards, her handwriting looping and careful. Beneath them was a manila folder. My fingers trembled as I lifted it out. The first page was covered in legal text, but one line stood out in bold letters, the Lewis Family Trust. I turned the page scanning until I found it. Appalachian Land Foundation, listed as the legal trustee. The date was 5 years earlier, signed by Mary and notarized. I read the clause twice before I understood it. Our home had been transferred into the trust, irrevocable and protected. No one, not even Jacob, could sell or claim it. The realization settled over me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Mary had seen this coming. She had known our son's weakness before I did. While I had been busy hoping he would grow out of his hunger for appearances, she had been quietly safeguarding what mattered most. Not the money, not even the house itself, but the integrity behind it. She had protected him from himself, and in doing so, she had saved both of us. I sat there for a long time. The papers spread around me, the sound of the old clock ticking in the next room. Grief and gratitude wrestled inside me until they became one thing, a calm, steady acceptance. Mary had built more than a home. She had built a fortress of foresight wrapped in love and law. A memory surfaced, then sharp and vivid. It was the night she told me about the box. She had been thin, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Mason," she said, "if something ever feels wrong, look under our bed. There is more strength in truth than in trust alone." I had laughed it off then, too proud to think we would ever need protection from our own son. Now her words burned through the years, clear as gospel. Outside I heard Jacob honk the car horn, impatient as always. I gathered the papers and placed them carefully back inside the box. I put the recipe cards on top just as I found them and closed the lid. Then I stood feeling the ache in my back, but also a strange new steadiness in my chest. When I stepped out onto the porch, Jacob called out, asking if I had found what I was looking for. I told him I had. He smiled, thinking I meant photo albums or trinkets. I let him believe it. Some truths are too powerful to speak before their time. As we drove back through the winding roads, he talked about stock options and mortgage rates. I barely heard him. My mind was back in that quiet bedroom, on the tin box under the bed, on the woman who had seen the storm before it arrived. Mary had given me the weapon I needed, but also the wisdom to use it gently. The sun dipped low behind the trees, and the road turned silver in the fading light. I rested my hand on the box in my lap and whispered softly to her memory, "You always built stronger foundations than I did. Mary, now it is my turn to finish what you started." The office at Thorn Capital was everything my house was not. It was made of glass-polished steel and the kind of silence that only money can buy. I sat across from Jacob, who looked like he had already won. Layla sat beside him in a white suit, her phone in hand, her smile fixed and empty. Across the wide mahogany desk sat Mr. Thorne, tall and sleek, his expression calm but his eyes restless. He slid the papers forward and said that all we needed was a signature to finalize the transfer. Before I could reach for the pen, the sound of the door opening cut through the room. Marjorie Lane walked in her heels, steady her voice, calm. She greeted no one but me, setting her old leather briefcase on the desk. Mr. Thorne's confident smirk faded slightly as she opened it. She placed a thin folder between us and said we seemed to have a misunderstanding. Jacob looked up sharply, his smile faltering. Marjorie spoke in that steady tone lawyers use when they already know how the story ends. She said my house was not mine to sell and not Jacob's to take. She read the title aloud, "The Lewis Family Trust," naming the Appalachian Land Foundation as the legal trustee. Then she looked directly at Jacob and told him that Mary had signed those papers 5 years ago, long before his plan was born. The property had been protected, not for profit, but for purpose. The words hit like thunder. Layla's phone slipped from her hand. Mr. Thorne leaned back in his chair, his smile gone. Jacob's face turned white. He tried to speak, but the words fell apart before they left his mouth. Marjorie closed the folder, her job finished. I watched the truth ripple through the room like a crack spreading through glass. Mr. Thorne was the first to stand. His voice was sharp, now stripped of charm. He said that Jacob had lied to him, that he had been given false documents. He turned his anger on Jacob, pointing a shaking finger at him. Jacob tried to apologize, but Thorne was already gathering his papers. He said the word fraud, and for a moment I thought he might strike my son, but then he simply walked out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed felt endless. Layla began to cry real tears now, not the practiced kind. She whispered about lost money, lost reputation, lost everything. Jacob just stared at the desk, his hands clasped together like a man praying to no one. I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, quiet sadness. The son I had raised was gone, replaced by this hollow man who had traded truth for appearance. I stood slowly and placed my hand on the folder. I told him his mother had seen this coming, that she had built the trust to protect the family, not to punish it. I said she believed in second chances, and so did I. He looked up at me, then tears blurring his eyes. I told him there was still a way forward, if he was willing to face the hard work of rebuilding something real. The Land Foundation always needed people who knew how to work with their hands. He could start there, building homes for families who needed them, learning what it meant to earn back trust one board at a time. 2 years later, the morning light poured through the windows of the workshop at the community housing site. The sound of saws and hammers filled the air. Jacob stood at the far table, cutting wood beside a young volunteer. His posture was humbler, now quieter. I could see the effort in his movements, the sincerity in his silence. Layla sometimes came by to bring food for the workers. Her online world was gone, replaced by something gentler. I ran my hand over a smooth plank of oak and smiled. It had taken him a long time to find his footing. But he was standing again, not as the man who wanted everything, but as the man who finally understood enough was enough. When the sun shifted across the room, Jacob looked up and met my eyes. He nodded a small, steady gesture of peace. It was not an apology, and it did not need to be. As I watched him work, I realized justice had nothing to do with punishment. It was about boundaries, about knowing when to protect love, instead of trying to control it. I had lost my house, but not my purpose. Mary had been right all along. Some foundations are built to outlast us, not to hold walls, but to hold what is true.